So thank you for inviting me to talk to your group. I was asked to talk about certified local government, which I'm going to do in maybe more detail than you want to see, but I also thought I would sort of put it in context of just other local tools for preservation. Specifically the different historic designations and what they can and can't do. And I'll talk about a little funding that's available through the CLG program, but also to nonprofits like the Historical Society, even a little bit for private homeowners and other incentives. But first, I just wanted to say a little bit about myself. As Allison said, I'm Mary Dunne. I'm from the State Historic Preservation Office, which is a state agency located in the Department of Economic and Community Development. There are, the SHPOs were set up by the federal government. So our federal partner is the National Park Service. And State Historic Preservation Offices were established under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And we exist to just carry out a lot of basic federal responsibilities at the state level to help the Park Service. And that includes helping develop townwide historic resources inventories. We do every 5 years a statewide preservation plan, and we get input from the general public on that. And we're about to start that process. So stay tuned. We'll have public meetings all over the state, and we'll want people to attend and let us know what their preservation concerns are and how we might work them into our plan. We do administer federal funding for historic preservation, mainly the certified local government funding. And then a large part of our work is regulatory. We oversee all projects that use public funding, licensing, or permitting and affect an historic property. It's about 3,000 projects a year. So for example, even if the FDIC wants to put a new bank somewhere, we have to look at that project because there's licensing and permitting involved and make sure there's no historic properties adversely affected by that project. So that's a large part of what we do. And then we provide, public information and training and technical assistance. And then, of course, the Certified Local Government Program is the federal responsibility that I actually undertake. So, but before we talk about CLG, or even just preserving your local resources, you have to identify those resources first, and hopefully designate them in order to provide not just protections, but financial incentives in a lot of cases. So I just wanted to talk about the differences between the basic designation levels. There's the National Register of Historic Places, and that was set up by the National Park Service. It's a list kept by the National Park Service, and it is meant to be completely honorary. It's just there to recognize historic resources that contribute to the history or architecture of our nations. There are no restrictions on what you can do with a property that's listed on the National Register. You can do whatever you want to it. However, in the state of Connecticut, we have what's called, or under the Environmental Protection Act, there is a provision that provides standing to anyone who wants to try to stop the unreasonable destruction of a property that's listed on the National Register. And they can actually sue to file an injunction against demolition. That's unique to Connecticut though. And then of course, certain properties are eligible for grant funding and tax credits. And then there's the state register, which is the list of historic properties that we keep at our office. And those are properties that contribute to the architectural history or history of the state of Connecticut specifically. Again, that's honor and recognition only, absolutely no restrictions on what you can do with your property, including there's no provision under the Environmental Protection Act. There's no protection under there. But state register listing is important because it's the lowest threshold for gaining access to our state grants and tax credits, which can provide financial incentives to municipalities and nonprofits nonprofits and certain private property owners to help with the maintenance and repair of their buildings. And then the third one is the local historic district. And Bloomfield does not have any locally designated historic districts or properties. Those are the ones that are designated by local ordinance, and then as a result are regulated by a local historic district commission, which actually has purview over a fairly limited scope. Generally, any changes to the exterior of a building that are visible from a public way. Local historic districts, in a local historic district, the commission will review new construction and demolition. Up until March of 2018, anything that was listed in a local district was automatically listed on the state register, which made it eligible for grants and tax credits. So we have the different designations that I just talked about. And so now I want to just kind of discuss a few maybe misconceptions or misinformation that might surround the different designations. So we'll start with, usually people are very opposed to any sort of designation because they think that that means they won't be able to paint their house any color they want, which is completely false, at least in the state of Connecticut. Our state, even the state statute that enables the local ordinance where the commission has review authority, it specifically prohibits considering paint color. So if you live in a local district even where there's actual review, you can paint your house any color you want. In fact, I'd just be grateful that you're painting your house rather than putting, vinyl siding on it. So yes, paint away. So that is a complete falsehood. I'll have to open my house to the public for tours. A private property owner does not have to do any such thing. If you're listed on the National Register or even a local district, there's not an invasion of your personal property rights or privacy. I will say that if you get a bricks and mortar grant from us, which is actually only available to nonprofits and municipalities, and that's grants, not tax credits, then there is a requirement that the work be visible to the public at least 12 times a year. But that's not, yes, a nonprofit who owns property, it's private property, but it's not like your personal house has to be visible to the public. The government will control what I can do with my property. Again, and maybe there's a little nuance there, but even the local historic district has no say in how you actually use your property. They do review any exterior changes that you want to make or new construction or demolition. And again, we're talking just about the local district. But they can't tell you that if you want to convert your house to, a music studio or whatever, a chicken farm, I don't know, fat rendering, you can do it as long as planning and zoning says you can do that, then you can do that. So the government does not control what you do with your property if you're in a local district. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. I mentioned earlier that our office reviews work that has public funding, licensing, or permitting. So that means if there's a road that the Department of Transportation wants to put through your neighborhood, and that neighborhood is listed on the National Register, we review that work to make sure it doesn't have an adverse impact on your property. So it's really more like, it's almost like more of a protection rather than the government, telling you what you can do. My house isn't historic. It's not even as old as I am. There is a threshold, an age threshold for the National Register, or not age, but years. Any property that's 50 years old or older can be reviewed for eligibility for the National Register. That means anything built in 1972 could be eligible for listing on the National Register. There's no age provision for state register or even local historic districts, which means we've listed properties that were constructed, well, certainly in the 80s. There's a local property that was built in 2000. So, old and historic and old aren't always, either interchangeable or mutually exclusive. If my house is designated, it's protected forever. That's not true, unfortunately. As I've noted before, listing on the National Register and the State Register, especially the State Register, imposes no restrictions on what you do with your property. So if you own a house that's on the State Register, it can be demolished pretty easily. National Register, again, there's that Environmental Protection Act provision that offers a certain, at least a buffer between, immediate demolition. And then in the local district, the commission would review demolition permits, but there's no guarantees that just because it's designated, it will stay that way forever. I think if that's something that you want, your better bet is to do like just an easement within your own property records. I'll have to return my house to its original appearance. That's also not true. If you have a house and it's vinyl sided, or it originally had a slate roof and now it has an asphalt shingle roof, and then it gets listed on the National Register, you can stay the way it is. That doesn't mean that you now have to put a slate roof on your house and put clapboard back on the house. It's as it is. We offer financial incentives if you want to replace the vinyl with wood clapboard, if that's what was originally there, but there's not a requirement that it be returned. And then preservation costs more than new construction. This is generally not true, and especially not true when we're talking about maintenance. If you take windows, for example, if you have your original windows, it is probably cheaper to caulk them and replace any cracked panes of glass, install a storm window, paint, rather than take them all out and replace them all with new windows. You're going to get the same energy efficiency and human comfort if you take all those measures, especially if you add a storm window, or even curtains will help. And by the time you recoup any, savings from, if you replace your windows and you save a little bit extra a month, you're not going to see a return on your investment before you have to replace those windows again. Even the replacement window companies talk about replacing the windows they put in 20 years ago. So it's just, it is generally not true. Not to mention the cost to the environment, but if we're talking dollars and cents, it's generally not true, especially when it comes to maintenance, that preservation is more than new construction. So that was a little intro, and again, I think there's going to be, except for that little glitch we just had, I think there will be plenty of time for Q&A, but that was a little bit about designations and what they mean and don't mean. And so now I'm going to get to the part that I was actually asked to come and talk about, which is the Certified Local Government Program. And that is basically a preservation partnership between a local municipality, our office, and the National Park Service. So a CLG is a municipal designation, and it can be, a municipality or any political subdivision like a borough. And what you're doing is just entering into an agreement. It's not an ironclad contract, but it's just an agreement or a commitment that you're just going to take a more intentional role in preservation planning in your community. The Certified Local Government Program was introduced to the Historic Preservation Act that I mentioned earlier in the 1980s. They were, an amendment. There are currently well over 2,000 CLGs in the United States. And it was just, as I said, put in place to build a strong preservation partnership between the municipality, the state, or our office, and the federal government, as represented by the National Park Service. And the benefit, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is to provide technical and financial assistance from the federal government and at the state level to local municipalities that are grappling with preservation issues and need a little extra help. So there are 54 CLGs in the state of Connecticut right now. I believe Torrington and Wilton are our latest ones, but that's how many we have. I'm sorry about these transitions. And the process, since it's a municipal designation, the process begins with your chief elected official, your first selectman, maybe your town manager, if that's how you're governed, or your mayor. And they make a written request to our office, to me, and just kind of requesting to be certified, and then letting us know how they're going to meet all of these criteria. The most important being that first check mark, establishing legislation for the designation and protection of historic properties. This is where the local historic district or property comes in. Because it's a municipality, we want a municipally designated historic resource. And many towns just begin with a town-owned building, because the process for designating a local historic district, which I have a whole different slideshow for, it can be lengthy, and it does require a 2/3 majority vote of the affected property owners, and then a majority vote of the local legislative body for it to be put in place. So when a municipality wants to be a CLG and they don't have any locally designated properties or districts, as is the case with Bloomfield, sometimes the town will just begin with one of their own properties. And then once that part of that legislation, and it happens under state enabling legislation 7-147, but part of that legislation is to establish an historic preservation review commission, which would have purview not just over the locally designated property or district, but an advisory role in just preservation in general and preservation planning in general in the city or the town. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier historic resources inventories. Bloomfield does, I believe, have at least one or two, but that is a basic information gathering tool. There's absolutely no benefits or restrictions associated with it, but it's a survey and an inventory of at least 150 properties, and it kind of gives the town an idea of just what they have and what they might want to designate, at some time. The National Register process in a certified local government is a lot more participatory. Nominations need to be presented to the public, the town, and if our office needs concurrence from the chief elected official and the local historic district commission. We need concurrence from them that they think the proposed property that's going to be listed on the National Register actually meets the required criteria. If the town or the commission do not think that a property should be listed on the National Register, then we do not pursue that nomination. And then finally, that last check mark is just a catch-all, which actually kind of just refers to the stuff up above, an adequate and qualified commission, maintaining an historic resources inventory, and having that local legislation in place. So once, and it's not an application, it's sort of like a compilation of documents, but if you're interested, just call me and I can give you sort of a template to go by. So once I get all of that information from the town, I forward it with my comments and recommendation to the Secretary of the Interior for concurrence. If they concur that the town meets all the qualifications, then there is a written agreement outlining the responsibilities signed by the town and my office and the National Park Service. And that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. It's not an ironclad contract. It's just, a commitment to trying to just consider your historic resources in your development and planning in the town. And then our office will provide training for your new commission and work with you to take advantage of the funding opportunities that are offered by the federal government as a result of the CLG training or designation. So the benefits are, education and training in historic preservation, which our office will provide to you anyway, if you want. But also CLGs would have access to broader national training opportunities, which a lot of towns find really informative and helpful when they're addressing preservation issues in their community. For the general citizen, if you know that your town is a CLG, you can encourage the town to follow its commitment, and you can kind of assist, if possible, kind of influencing preservation in the community by suggesting properties that might, be eligible for designation, or suggesting educational opportunities, awareness, like walking tours or things, just to kind of get the community to be aware of the historic resources they have. And then, of course, there is funding available, specifically from the federal government. The first is the Historic Preservation Enhancement Grant. And this is a non-matching grant provided by the federal government. The National Park Service provides our office with funding every year, and we take 10% of that funding and give it to the CLGs in the form of grants. But there's no match required, and it's up to $20,000. It's generally used for, outreach, preservation, education, and awareness, but it could also be used for, if you have a vacant building and you just want to know, you want to restore it and put it into use, but you don't know exactly what's wrong with it. You can get the $20,000 to hire an architect to come in and tell you, give you recommended treatments for putting the building, back into use. A lot of commissions use it for publications, walking tours, workshops, things like that. And as a private citizen, you could encourage the town to do that as well, to get that funding to do that. Then there's the Supplemental Certified Local Government Grant. That's up to $30,000. It's also a reimbursable grant. This is state money funded by the Community Investment Act. It's called Supplemental CLG because when the Community Investment Act was passed in 2005, I think, it started infusing a lot of money strictly for historic preservation. And so we decided to earmark some of it for certified local governments so that they could, supplement the non-matching $20,000 grant that's available to them. It does require non-state matching funds, but a lot of CLGs will apply for the federal and this one, and they use them to match each other. So it can pack, kind of a powerful punch. But if you need to do an historic resources inventory, and that's the survey that, will take an area of your town or maybe the whole town and just identify potential historic resources. We can give you a non-matching $30,000 grant for that. And that also applies to updating a survey. If you have a survey that was done in like the 1980s, we can provide funding to update that survey. And then there's non-CLG funding. I thought I would just throw this out there. I would love it if Bloomfield wanted to become a CLG. We love the partnerships, but even as a non-CLG right now, the town and nonprofits like the Historical Society are eligible for funding from our office. This is all state funding. It's the Community Investment Act funding again, but it's in the form of survey and planning grants, Partners in Preservation grants, and the Historic Restoration Fund. And the survey and planning grants do a variety of things, like, architectural plans and specifications, condition assessments, feasibility studies for vacant and underused buildings, community charrettes to figure out what to do with an underused historic resource, things like that. The Partners in Preservation grants are more for education, outreach, things like that aren't necessarily pre-development. The survey and planning grants also will provide funding for doing nominations to the National and State Register. And then the Historic Restoration Fund grant is our bricks and mortar program. That's a matching grant of up to $200,000, and that's for a preservation construction project. If you have an historic building that needs a new roof, and the roof's going to cost you $400,000, well, we can give you $200,000 of that to help provide that. This picture is Ski's Diner. We provided an HRF grant to them to acquire the diner. And then we just provided a survey and planning grant for them to do plans and specifications to put it back into use. And then for the private homeowner, there's a tax credit, the historic homes rehabilitation tax credit, and that's available to anybody with an owner-occupied residence of 1 to 4 units of housing. So if you own a duplex and you occupy one and you rent the other, you're eligible for the historic homes tax credit. And it provides for 30% of eligible project costs. So you have a house, it needs a new roof, it's going to cost you $80,000. You can get a tax credit of $24,000 or 30%. I hope that's right. Yes, $24,000 to offset the cost of that roof replacement. The amount of the credit caps at $30 per dwelling unit. So if you have $100,000 worth of work, you can get $30,000 in a tax credit. If you have $120,000 worth of work, it's only $30 in the form of a tax, because it caps the project. The credit caps at $30,000, so the project costs effectively cap at $100,000. And the work does need to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, but we do use the rehabilitation standards, which are fairly flexible. So if you're interested in that program, let me know and I'll put you in touch with Erin Fink. I didn't mention that project costs have to total at least $15,000. It used to be 25. We introduced legislation to get it lowered to 15, and we're hoping to introduce legislation to get it even lower. So it's just more accessible to more property owners, more homeowners. I think I'm almost done, except for there's a few other, tools that you might, consider. The village districts. Our office doesn't have any role in this, but I can kind of explain a little bit about it. A village district is set up under enabling legislation. They're identified in your plan of conservation and development. Once they're established, they're administered by your Planning and Zoning Commission. The scope is broader than the purview of a local historic district. Usually the town establishes design review guidelines for a certain section of town, and then has a design review committee that reviews work that comes in front of them. I really don't, since we don't administer this program, I don't know how many towns have village districts, but I do know that these do. Brooklyn, East Haddam, Hamden, etc. You can read that those have village districts. And then there is newer enabling legislation, 7-14810F, that allows municipalities to, quote, protect the historic or architectural character of properties or districts that are listed on or under consideration for the National Register of Historic Places or State Register. That is extremely broad legislation. There are a few municipalities that have implemented this legislation, and it has been translating into establishing a town-wide preservation review commission. That's a lot of work, but that's what that was put in place for. It's not a local historic district commission. It's different, and it doesn't even have to be a local commission, because as you can see from the language, it doesn't tell you how you can protect these resources. It just says that you can. And so towns have been coming up with their own ways to interpret that statute and implement local preservation tools. So next steps, continue to build public awareness of the value of historic preservation and the resources that you have in your town. You can do that through presentations such as this one, as long as they run smoothly or more smoothly. Continue to identify historic resources, to put them on the state or national register, or even consider exploring implementing a local historic district, which I can help you with as well. Definitely take advantage of financial incentives from our office. Again, if you're a nonprofit who owns an historic resource and you need help in any way, we can provide funding for that. Or you can encourage your town to apply for funding for town-owned buildings that are in need of a repair or reuse planning. And then, consider asking your town to become a certified local government, because hopefully, that's meant to kind of just strengthen the partnership between our office and your town, to provide, training and technical assistance and funding. So with that, I think that's it. But for more information, you can contact me. That's my phone number and my email address. And I guess we're ready for questions, if there are any.
Does all of this, everything you're talking about, only apply if we become a
CLG?
A CLG, thank you.
No, I mean, as I said, I'd love it if Bloomfield wanted to be a CLG, but the CLG is sort of the preservation partnership that just provides a little bit more assistance. But right now, the town of Bloomfield or a nonprofit could designate historic resources. You could get grants to designate historic resources. You can implement a local historic district without being a CLG, if that's what you want to do. So it can be sometimes confusing sometimes, but all of these preservation tools are available to a municipality and a nonprofit, regardless of whether or not the municipality is a certified local government. I think a lot of people will just say that the one of the main benefits of being a CLG is access to more non-matching funding, but I'm hoping it's more than that. I'm hoping that it's also better training opportunities and education.
Let's say it wasn't the whole town that wants to renovate historic property and stuff. Can that be done by a private person? He has a 250-year-old house. He could try to access those grants and so on?
Our grants are only available to nonprofit organizations or municipalities, but that last tax credit that I talked about, that is available to private homeowners. And then there's also a larger tax credit that's available to commercial property owners. So yeah, the only funding available to the private citizen is the tax credit. And again, you don't have to be in a CLG to take advantage of that.
First of all, is there any downside to becoming it? Before you answer that, is the main benefit the access to your expertise and telling us how to make grants and so on? And is there any difficulty? Do you accept everybody who wants to become a CLG? Yeah, I would not say there's any downside. I always say it's mostly carrot and no stick, because you kind of make of it what you want. I will say that the national standard for certified local government is pretty stringent, but most states meet the municipality where they are. And so, like if you have a preservation commission that may not, that may need training, we'll give you the CLG designation, and then we will work with you to just to learn how to administer a local historic district or things like that. But I've never had a town apply to be a CLG that did not get the designation. And I'd be happy to, attend a joint meeting of the Historical Society and the town if they want to, if they have more questions and just want to know more information. So yes, definitely.
But thank you so much for your time and for your expertise on this. And we have much more to discuss on our end.
Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing back from you guys.